Aphoristic Appendage to On Truthtelling. 1601 to 1650. 1601. Performing like a god in one or two areas while incompetent or incapacitated in others is what no human being can exceed at one end or escape at the other. 1602. That the human race is a rapacious multi-headed beast is well documented. 1603. Society, be it capitalist or communist, can run from the extremely polite and well-behaved to the extremely ruthless and violent. In both cases, not only is organization a common factor, even riots aren't entirely exempt from it, but also learned behavior and professional detachment. What marks the great divide between these two extremities must be something heterogeneous, something always in play in society but never quite in sync with it. Something like a moral outlook or mission that is heterogeneous in itself because it is forged in familiarity and kinship but then tried and tested elsewhere until it achieves its most widespread and spectacular effects. The first provides the emotional basis or catalyst while the second the imaginative and intellectual charting of a course and the means to navigate it. Of course, both components must interact and support each other if abstraction is to be kept at a distance and conflict, which of course tends to overlap and mutate, appropriately categorized. 1604. For pure entertainment value, political stupidity can be either a cheap or costly affair. It all depends on where you're sitting. 1605. Truth is inseparable from the telling of it except where in principle and in practice they are clearly distinct or, to put it another way, ruled by a momentous and masterful telling called metaphysics, logic, science, ethics, etc. 1606. Politicians do not so much tell lies as tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth with partial truths to be patched together and then played out. Politicians do not so much tell lies as tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth like a giant shell game. 1607. It is not so much youth despising or being indifferent to age as not finding it a main attraction. 1608. Horrible crimes are where we find the most concentrated form of evil and where the police and other authorities, if they are not the perpetrators themselves, spare no amount of time, energy, and resources looking for the culprits. In its more diluted form, evil is a set of crimes and misdemeanors that, where the evidence is lacking, hardly ever spurs an effort that could be called even commensurately close to the first. 1609. A belief system is a complex set of ideas and values that are foundational, hard to disprove, self-reinforcing, and because they constitute a welter of vested interests not only intergenerational but also generative of diverse, far-ranging, interdependent, and peripheral ones, critique-resistant to the point of insanity. 1610. How much of what we live, when living it, seems to be rather mundane but when looked back at many years later, if we are lucky and blessed with a forgiving memory, rather strange and marvelous. 1611. Most people don't mind being lied to if the following conditions are met. First, it is a largely unconscious affair. Second, it does not have bad consequences for them. Third, it is what most people around them accept. Fourth, it is what people in authority or in the public eye approve of. Fifth, it provides them with a good conscience. Sixth, it permits them some sort of emotional release. And seventh, it helps them feel better about themselves. 1612. Why do so many political leaders come across as being both distinguished and despicable if not for a complex dynamic where honoring is often a shallow, perfunctory affair and dishonoring a sort of popular sport? Not to be excluded from this picture of political leaders and how they present themselves or get presented is the common practice of vice parading as virtue or equally as common, virtue transforming itself, inadvertently or not, into vice. In the case at hand, it is the near-universal phenomenon of showcasing one's moral and civic duty in a way that not only tolerates hyperbolic and hypocritical judgments but also indulges in them and, indeed, values them. 1613. It is not uncommon for people to come to a great philosopher not with the objective of trying to understand the world better but only with the one of trying to understand the philosopher better. After all, they already know the world. 1614. Cheating is to be found in all human affairs, even philosophy and science, but while in some areas it is hidden by being marginalized and, indeed, greatly marginalized, in others it is rendered invisible, so to speak, by going mainstream. 1615. When it comes to changing one's situation in life, it is sometimes the case that what was disagreeable about it ends up looking rather agreeable after the change of situation has in itself proven entirely right. 1616. In most instances, telling the truth and telling a good story have to compete with each other until a marriage of convenience can be worked out, making almost everybody happy. 1617. Showing how sharp-eyed and scrupulous one is in the matter of determining and evaluating evil constitutes the whole of the ethical behavior of most people, save for that small part reserved for self-criticism. 1618. All sentient being is matter so full and forgetful of itself, so caught up in its short but fascinating flight, and so oblivious to its dumbed-down adventure in all of time and space that it cannot help but be a twinge in feeling sorry for itself. 1619. We are blessed with suffering in this world because complete happiness would be a state of being without comparison or contrast, and therefore without meaning except perhaps as a certain strain of madness. 1620. Apart from some historical or religious references, we leave no one more to their own than the dead. 1621. Is it possible that a philosopher of the stripe of Martin Heidegger, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Karl Marx, or Friedrich Nietzsche looked into the mirror one day and said, "My moral sensibility has compelled me not to be indifferent to any sort of intellectual fraud. In other ways, however, I've been morally derelict and perhaps monstrous?" 1622. Even if one has the purest intentions, the purest desire to tell the truth, one is inevitably confounded and contaminated by other elements, like the one of wanting to carry a off well. 1623. Suppose, roughly speaking, there are two realities that are discernible but not separable. Suppose the first of these, the most commonly viewed, is the world of subjects and objects, the world of metaphysics, science, logic, morality, and the whole of nature. Suppose the second of these, far less commonly viewed, is the world from which subjects and objects emerge, from which all opposites are constituted as the basis of our understanding of metaphysics, science, logic, morality, and the whole of nature. Given the above, would it not be fair to say that the second reality, the seemingly primordial or underlying one, carries little or no weight for us, at least subjectively if not objectively speaking, while the first, even if illusion, carries all before it? 1624. The tyrannous, whatever form it may take, is generally tolerant of everything except the rejection of its authority, its good and evil. 1625. Much will be tolerated and even praised when taken to be fighting against evil that later will win no laurels and even be considered odious. 1626. If the media were forced not to report nonsense, a major distraction would be eliminated, equivalent to shutting down whole sectors of the entertainment industry. 1627. The ontological, both P and not P, i.e., both true and false, real and unreal, good and bad, etc., makes possible the logical, either P or not P. The logical itself is not the origin of either P or not P, but only the bringing of them together to set them apart as opposites. Ontologically speaking, they are also brought together and set apart as the union of the logical and ontological, which is at the same time their not being ultimately separable from each other. Having gone beyond logic, their union is the logical and non-logical or superlogical. 1628. To judge by appearances, but by appearances only, political issues give millions of people the chance to show not only good but near infallible judgment. 1629. Said the dying man who had lived a full life and really had nothing to complain about, "There was a final answer I was waiting for to the question, what was it all for, but I never got it clearly or completely." 1630. Few will say they don't abhor war, and fewer still they have a fascination for it. 1631. Politics, especially as we get it at the national and international levels, and especially as it comes to us during times of war, is the only discourse that allows so much ill will and stupidity to pass itself off as meritorious and just. 1632. Thinking highly of oneself for being virtuous is common only because being virtuous in the way of taking personal risks or making personal sacrifices is not. Where it is most justifiable, in other words, to think highly of oneself for being virtuous is where there are few virtue seekers to be found, and even if these few think highly of themselves for being virtuous, there is certainly nothing common about it. 1633. How is it that, when arguing with someone on intellectual matters, we often see him in two contrasting and offsetting ways? On the one hand, as one whose thinking is limited and lowbrow because he uses pejoratives and prejudicial language, makes unfounded claims, speaks vaguely in key areas, refrains from giving specific details or examples to back up his most outrageous statements, and shifts the ground to avoid some important point at issue. On the other hand, as one who conducts himself rather well in conversation, who is certainly not short on things to say, who shows a considerable fund of knowledge, and who acts almost without fail as a perfect gentleman. 1634. What reaches us as sensational news, which of course can include what is most horrible and shocking, is an intoxicant that if it were suddenly withdrawn, would induce a malaise even while we struggle to interpret this strange turn of events in a positive way. 1635. Some thoughts come only at the end of a life. One of them might be that the idea of going on forever is no longer tenable. Another might be that the latest dream we had will have no sequel. 1636. A world must be nearly perfect to allow an even more perfect one to appear which, because of its having value only as still to be achieved event and because of its limitations as such, secretly yields to the imperfect one, the world in which we abide, the title of greatest achievement. 1637. Broadly speaking, morality without self-interest would be without ideology or insincerity. Despite innumerable instances to the contrary in which the above does not hold, where there are moments of self-abnegation or even self-sacrifice based on ideology and other factors, it is still the case that morality as a general part of the human condition is only pure in principle. Although there are individuals or groups specifically dedicated to this principle, who often inspire and indoctrinate others, the basic situation is that the rudimentary ground of morality, which accounts for many of its inconsistent and heterogeneous elements, is reciprocity. 1638. Reality is what is close or even closest to us in time and space as possibility and impossibility. Unreality is what is far and even furthest from us in time and space, though imagined or thought of as being close, as the impossible become possible and vice versa. Since the close becomes far and the far becomes close, not only biographically or historically but also biologically, cosmologically, and eschatologically, it follows that the prospects, the changes already undergone and the ones yet to come, exceed imagination. 1639. The materialistic or scientific account of reality is adequate enough if one is willing to fill in the unexplained remainder, be it immensely large or infinitely small, with something adequately expressive, something that, although not quite an explanation, resembles one. Among the possibilities is attributing this unexplained remainder to some sort of miracle. Of course, the materialist or scientist will likely feel uncomfortable with this word as much as with the words God, mystery, and unknowable. If such is the case, he will have no choice but to keep chipping away at this mountain or, as he might view it, molehill as if it were merely a heap of unsolved problems. 1640. Like religion, science must have a set of beliefs more authoritative than authenticated if it wishes to maintain its course at full speed and with flying colors. 1641. Superficial judgments, as opposed to suspending judgment until such time as a more solid judgment can be reached, abound not only in what is reported about the world, i.e., the discourse of politics and the media, but also in the response to it, i.e., formal and informal discussions about these reports and the world at large. Putting aside the matter of how this reflects on Western society, superficial judgments are, after all, not far removed from self-deception. We should note that these judgments are fairly common in other areas save for three relatively wide ones which, because of knowledge requirements, resist them: the professional, practical, and personal. Of course, these last three, as a cohesion and collection of strictly grounded discourses in Western society, are only rarely, marginally, or exceptionally in the realm of politics and the media. 1642. There are some people who amaze us with robust intellects not honed for skillful argument but for finding ways and means, both rhetorical and encyclopedic. Half arguments or information overload is not objectionable to them, to get by without it. 1643. This man's idea of humanism, which he touts to the skies, doesn't carry over into seeking the highest standards of fair play in argument. B. Perhaps you're being too harsh on him. A. No doubt.
He has good intentions. D. Isn't that half the battle? A. What does battling have to do with humanism? B. But surely, you're not denying that people must fight to achieve justice. A. No, not at all. B. Then what's your point? A. My point is the observation of something being awry in the matter of fighting for justice, which at the same time is the stumbling block for others who wish to carry on this fight with a good conscience. B. If I understand you correctly, they see you as doing something bad. A. Just as I do them, only the difference is what I see happening upstream versus what they imagine downstream. 1644. With respect to the good, the gap between talking about it and doing it can vary greatly, particularly among those who talk about it as if there were no gap at all. 1645. When someone talks about the superiority of the current social, moral, and political climate as if he himself were representative of it or, for that matter, simply a grateful and reverent beneficiary, one should remember that the same thing has been done many times in the past with views that are no longer considered acceptable. 1646. Having a belief sufficiently strong to ward off any doubts is simply finding enough reasons not to reason about it in a destabilizing way. Needless to say, these reasons, which include finding both a point to ban questioning and a point at which to abandon it, can stretch from environmental influences to personal considerations of the most subtle and wide-ranging sort. 1647. Being committed to doing good may involve a certain amount of fakery, e.g., telling the dying child she is on the road to recovery, just as being committed to telling the truth may involve a certain amount of cruelty, e.g., informing the brave soldiers the war is unwinnable. With these admixtures of fakery on one side and cruelty on the other, it may be seen that, even at the highest level, morality is impure in the strong sense of having to be so. 1648. One way of looking at the matter is that we already have the truth, the rest is interpretation. 1649. If one takes into consideration, especially on a daily basis, that nothing has to be given, not life, not a summer's day, not food on the table, not service at the shop or directly to one's front door, then the saying "count one's blessings" is less an instruction than a felt presence, an existential fact. 1650. Before he died, he was fortunate enough to be where he could see the sun shining and clouds majestically sailing by. After he died, but perhaps he was still dreaming, he had the distinct impression that not only was this natural beauty eternal but also his experience of it, or rather his experiencing it.